Hey there, welcome to another episode of Monday Moments. It's been a couple of weeks and we apologize for the delay in getting some of these episodes out. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. August, I think, has been pretty wild in and of itself. So anyways, as always, hit that subscribe button if you want to be notified every time a new episode is posted. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So we started a new series, The Heart of Freedom Fellowship, which is not something necessarily new. We came up with these 7 what we call non-negotiables back in 2017, I think, or 2018?
2017, 2018.
Somewhere around there. Yeah, so and I think it's good to kind of refresh those and why it's so important, especially since we've seen a lot of new growth. So I guess getting right into it, what led you to pick this series or to start this series?
I think it's like anything. I think it's really important that people know who you are and what you stand for. I think that the churches, individual churches, can be so unique in really what their calling is and really what their purpose is. And back probably 2016, 2017, we really had a lot of these questions. It says, like, what makes Freedom Fellowship unique? And as we began to look over the history of the church and began to ask ourselves and look at, like, what over the years has God really used us for? Like, what are the ways that we have been, the places that we've been successful, the themes that we kind of continue to draw back to, and in doing that, we were really able to kind of press all of this down till we came to this point that what came out of that are these non-negotiables. We say these are the things which we that we don't negotiate on, that really make us unique.
I would, it's you see this a lot in the corporate world. They call them, core values or, the core beliefs, something like that. And because you see it so often in kind of the business world, I know other churches have kind of their own set of, core values and such. And, we see the value for an organization, especially a large organization that says, this is how we're going to operate. These are the principles that are going to define who we are. And we see the value in that for churches, for organizations, for businesses. Is there any value for individuals or families to sort of have some of these, their own set of core values or core beliefs or non-negotiables?
I think that, just as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, when you talk about purpose, like what is your purpose? I think your purpose is the why behind where you're going. It gives you some clarity as far as those things. And so certainly for a person, I think that we all need to have those non-negotiables in our own life. Like, what is this? What are the things that I will not compromise on that will really help me in the decision-making process of, am I going to commit this to it? Because I think more and more you even in your personal life, like, you run out of time, and there's more things that are available to do than you would ever have time to do. So how do you make the decision as to what you really commit yourself to? And so I think that having those non-negotiables in your personal life is really what helps you to determine what you're not going to do, but even more to help you decide really what you're going to do. And from a corporate standpoint, I think it becomes really important for churches that we define these things clearly, because it helps people know what they're committing themselves to. And so we talk about these things, and if that's something that resonates in a person's heart, then because they know what our standards are and because they know what our commitments are, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to decide, hey, like, is this the place for me? And once they do, they can commit at a much deeper level because we share a common purpose in doing that. So.
Well, and I think we see Jesus doing this, whether it was, he had a listed out statement or not, but he he often said, I'm about my Father's business. Or when the Canaanite woman approached him, he said, I'm called to the lost sheep of Israel.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to the fact that, especially with Jesus, there's a lot of good things that he could have been out doing, but it may have taken him off of his main mission.
Yeah.
That the purpose for which he was sent.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, and how it's possible even in our own lives that we can get caught up in doing good things, you know. But is it what we feel like God is specifically calling us?
Yeah, and
do?
I think that goes along, the statement that they always say, good is the greatest enemy of best.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just be doing good things. I want to do the best thing. I want to do the thing that the Lord has really purposed for me to do. And I want to be a part of a community of people that I really believe in what that community has purposed itself to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this last Sunday's sermon, you focused in on the first of our non-negotiables, which is intimacy with God, intimacy with others. Why is that one the foundational, non-negotiable or core principle?
I think that primarily, and I said this Sunday, but I think it's the why behind the what. Like it really talks about why we do everything that we do. So everything else that we talk about over these coming 6 weeks is going to be based on this foundation of, does it draw us closer to God? Does it draw us closer to other people? And that's really what motivates every part of what we do. Yeah. And so to begin there, it really is like everything else is kind of built upon this idea of intimacy. And when we talk about intimacy, obviously we're talking about this deep connectedness. And so what does a deep connectedness do? I think becomes a really important question. And I would say that a deep connectedness removes aloneness. Like it doesn't fix my problems. It doesn't necessarily make what I'm struggling with any less of a challenge. But what it does do is it keeps me from feeling so alone in the midst of that. Like when I have those kinds of relationships. And so you can define that. Like what does it look like to have an intimate relationship? One question, does that relationship help you feel less alone? Or does it just kind of exist? Because you can be alone with a lot of people. Yeah. You can feel that deep sense of aloneness and still be around a lot of people. I would say that's probably the result of not having intimate relationships in that, because intimate relationships know more about me. Right. I can ask someone who I have an intimate relationship with, hey man, how are you doing? And it's going to mean something completely different than some person that I know casually that I say, hey, how are things going? Yeah. One person is going to think much more deeply about that question than the other person. Right. The one who thinks more deeply, they do that because there's an intimate relationship there. So,
yeah, and that makes me. You referenced Adam and Eve, and how God created them with this need for relationship, and an intimate relationship, and that doesn't just mean physically intimate, as you talked about on Sunday. But there's that verse that says they were naked and they felt no shame. And certainly, there was the physical, but it was more than that. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was mentally. There was nothing that they kept from the other. Yeah. And there was that connection. And I think that's a really good word. If we feel uncomfortable with the word intimacy, I think connection is a really good. Do I feel connected at in my home? Do I feel connected in my friends? Do I feel connected where I work? Do I feel connected in my church? And that, because it's easy, and we hear this from time to time, is I just felt like another number, in a sea of faces. I didn't feel connected.
And I think that maybe sometimes we look for words that are a little bit more palatable. I think that the struggle with that, and that's maybe one of the reasons why I'm so committed to the word intimacy, even though that word at times can be difficult. Like people that just hear that, they struggle maybe with that word. But connectedness, I can buy connectedness. Yeah. Like I can pay to be a part of a club. I can pay to be a part of an organization. I could pay to be a part of something, and I'm connected to that group. I'm connected through them financially, but that doesn't really produce or it certainly doesn't guarantee intimacy. I can be a part of that and not really feel. I can feel like I'm connected because I have a vote or I have a voice or something like that, but not really feel that intimacy. And when we talk about Adam and Eve, it's, you say they were naked and not ashamed. Most people, when they hear the word naked, are just going to think of this physical nakedness, but it was so much more than that. Like there was nothing that was hidden between them. And when I consider relationships that are just common relationships, I wouldn't define them that way. Like I don't know how someone's going to respond. I don't know how they're going to deal with my failure. I don't know how they're going to struggle. And that's not what was being described there. Like there was nothing hidden between Adam and Eve. They weren't concerned about how the other person would perceive something. And so emotionally, and here's the thing, when we are naked emotionally or in our personal life or in our spiritual life, it means that we are 100% available.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's what I want to be. And that's really, I think, a really good definition of intimacy is 100% available to these things. And so we talk about that twofold. Mm-hmm. Obviously, our relationship with God, first and foremost, like that has to come first, because He's the one who takes away the shame.
Wow.
And so what is the result of shame? The result of shame always leads us to hiding, to concealing thing. It was the first thing. In fact, Adam and Eve. So they sin in the garden. Shame comes in. They're ashamed of what happens. And what's the first thing they do? They hide from God and they hide from one another. Yep. And that's been the continual deal. So what does God come to do? God comes to remove the shame, so that there's no more of this need to hide. Well, if God has not yet removed the shame, I'm absolutely going to conceal parts of my life from you, because I'm still ashamed of them. I'm still under that burden. And so that's why, like, there's a definite order to this: intimacy with God, and we could also say then intimacy with other people, because there no longer has to be this cloak around these places. We trust one another deeply in that.
That relationship with God has to be the first step.
Absolutely.
If we're closed off, if we have closed the door to the Lord in our hearts or something, I mean, that door is just not going to be open for other people. Just in the last couple of minutes, what are some of the effects? I feel like you kind of started to touch on this on Sunday, but didn't get a whole lot into it. What are some of the effects of loneliness? Why is loneliness, aloneness so potentially devastating?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously with just kind of the place in life that we're living at now, with especially, I would say, coming out of COVID, but we're really kind of right in the midst of it again. We're seeing all of this stuff kind of pop up, and we're beginning to hear a lot of the same words. We're beginning to hear words like quarantine and all of this stuff. Aloneness is actually one of those things that has been studied in the secular psychology pretty extensively. Like, what are the effects of these things? And so here recently, with all of this quarantine and having to social distance and all of these words that were unfamiliar to us 18 months ago are now kind of these commonplace things. And so what has happened, and this is just on a secular psychology place, that they're beginning to see some of these effects. And one of the things that they have said about loneliness for a long time is that loneliness produces a higher morbidity rate. People have a tendency to die earlier. Increase in heart disease, obviously increases in depression. There's a lot of these really physical effects. But what's interesting is that as a result of what's happened in the last 18 months, is that we've kind of taken this idea of quarantine and of social distancing, And psychologists are saying that because of the way that is worded, it's almost being shown that relationships are detrimental to your health.
Wow.
Like you have to treat people as if they're a threat to your life. And so if you look at like what's the end result of that, what they're finding is that as a result of this is that people are now isolating from relationships by choice instead of by this decree. And people are not coming out of that. Well, what's the result of that? Well, the result of that is that we're seeing this major increase in people that are saying they feel alone.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing because what was the first thing that the enemy used to try to destroy that? He tried to cut off relationship.
Yeah.
And so Adam and Eve find themselves alone, both from one another. Now they're hiding.
Yeah.
And that's really what aloneness is hiding. Aloneness is carrying something alone by yourself, not letting other people in, whether it be God or whether it be one another.
Yeah.
And what are we seeing? We're seeing people begin to isolate portions of their life from one another. What's the result? We're seeing this tremendous increase in aloneness. What are the effects of aloneness? Just from a science standpoint, we're seeing increases in cortisol levels, increases in depression, increases in heart disease, increases in dissatisfaction, more and more isolation as a result of these things, and it's damaging because that was what God came to restore.
Yeah.
He came to restore. And the enemy is always trying to destroy what God has created. Right. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. What he can't steal, he'll try to kill. What he can't kill, he's just going to mess up. Yep. Where do we see a lot of life getting messed up in our current culture? Relationship. Yep. Relationship with God, relationship with people around us.
Yeah, it's no wonder. I think, like you're saying, we're seeing these adverse effects, and it's all snowballing out of isolation. How whether we are physically isolated from each other, whether we put up walls, between other people, whether maybe it's a social issue, a political issue, or whatever. There is just a lot of distancing that's happening, and it's no wonder that we are seeing some of these adverse health effects. And like you said, this is just the physical side. It's not even getting into the spiritual side of things. But
this is what the world is seeing happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's indicative of, like you said, the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And if he can isolate, we're easier to pick off.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's strength and safety in groups. And the enemy knows that if we will really believe that and take that to heart, we're going to be a whole lot harder targets to pick off. And yet, at least in my world, especially as an introvert, it's easy to want to just do my own thing, not get involved or whatever. And I have to choose to say, no, I'm going to engage. I'm not going to hide, and not necessarily because of a sin issue, but I'm just my nature is aloneness.
I think that's I think that's what sin does.
Yeah.
That's not it's like you got sin in your life, like that's why you're the way you
confession
are. But that's the result of original sin. It's separation, and so we're drawn to that, which is again that's why intimacy with God is so important.
Yes.
Because that's what he came to remove. Yeah. He came to remove our aloneness. And that can only happen when we trust in relationship, and that's where intimacy really comes into play.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to talk with us. Thanks so much for watching another episode of Monday Moments. We are so thankful for you being here, being a part of this. So if you enjoyed this, give it a like, give it a share. Always be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate it. And we want to hear from you. What stood out to you from Sunday's sermon? What stood out to you from our conversation today? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. So thank you again for watching another episode of Monday Moments, and we will see you next week.